And just so you know, it'll appear to you that we're live just a couple of seconds before we actually are. So just bear with me and I'll let you know when we're at. Couple of seconds before we actually are. So just bear with me. And okay. We're live streaming on YouTube. So I want to say good morning to everybody. Welcome to our school committee members and welcome to Pam McDonald, who is our first candidate, our first finalist for Assistant Superintendent for Pupil and Personnel Services. Pam, I had sent you an email with a little bit of the format that we were going to follow today, and I just want to reiterate that for everybody who's here with us and also for the folks that might be listening at home. We're going to try to use more of a conversational method in this series of interviews. And so we have just 4 broad questions that we're going to ask. And the first question will be asked by committee woman and Secretary Stacey Rizzo. And she'll have a little bit of a dialogue back and forth with you. And we anticipate that will take about 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. And when she's finished, she'll invite the other committee members to ask any questions that they have on the same topic or relative to what you said. They won't ask you entirely different questions. And when that, we'll go on to the second question, which Dr. Mokaba is going to ask. We'll do the same process. Dr. Mokaba will have a back and forth with you for about 10 minutes. And then she'll invite the other committee members to ask any questions they have. We'll go on to the third question, which will be asked by Vice Chair Susan Gravelisi. And then the last question will be asked by Dr. Lorenzo Garcia. Okay. Sound good? Everybody has your resume and we've given them some information that we got, like the background information from our first round of interviews. So we don't need to reiterate those pieces if that's okay.
Yep.
All right. With that, we will begin. And I just want to remind everybody who's not speaking that they should have their microphone muted.
Okay, good morning, Pam.
Good morning, nice to see you.
Always a pleasure. Would you please describe an innovative way in which you successfully solved a special ed problem?
So my time in Haverhill was very interesting. When I got to Haverhill, I was I think like the 4th special ed director in 3 years. Mm-hmm. So everything I've had to do in Haverhill was innovation. I've had to basically reinvent everything, all the policies and procedures there. So it's been really interesting there. I've learned so much. One of the things, we had some issues with some out-of-district students and they were deaf and hard of hearing. So we had to create a program for them, which was one of the funnest things I've done. But we had to be really innovative because we didn't have, lots of times when you build a program for students, and I've built many programs, you have cohorts of students, like 4 kids at this age group and 4 kids at this, but we didn't have that. We had one-offs here and there. So we really had to look at the whole picture and creatively find a way to find placements for them within our district. And we did that successfully, and they're all still in district. And we had to think outside the box a lot in that program and look at the resources that we had already and change those to adapt to those students. One of the other things that I've had a lot of work in the area that is the turnaround schools. Haverhill has had quite a few turnaround schools. And I think one of the most innovative things I've done is work on at the Tilton School with their turnaround plan. They were in the 4th percentile and we developed a turnaround plan and we worked really hard to bring it up. And I'm happy to say we're at the 21st percentile. But one of the things we did was totally revamp their special ed programming and the way they delivered services. And we incorporated it more into the gen ed, and we did groupings, differential groupings throughout the grade level, and the teachers worked together to deliver services on a rotating basis. And the other thing that we did, I think, at Tilton that was really innovative is the way that we did our family engagement piece. It was kind of fun, but we really worked hard at meeting our families where they were, which I think was a big piece, not only for special ed, but for the whole school to move forward. We did, we were talking about it the other day with the principal. We were doing rolling rallies and parades before COVID. We would get on buses and we would ride around the neighborhoods, and we'd post it all over Facebook that we were going out, and we'd stop at the parks. We would do it a couple days before school started, because what we were discovering was a lot of our students weren't coming the first week or so. So how do you get them in the door on that first day? That was really important to us, so we could all start off. And we went out to the playgrounds and we gave out school supplies and backpacks, and we met them where they were. And I think that was huge for us, because it allowed us to build relationships on their ground, and it disarmed them a little bit, because they weren't intimidated by coming in to talk about academics. We were standing at the playground. We were riding around on buses, quite frankly, making fools of ourselves with pom-poms. And I think that approach was very innovative, and it was fun. And, you know, Tilton does a lot of things, and I love going there because, you know, it's so innovative. And I was really lucky to be a part of that process.
And I'm familiar with Tilton. 2 of my nephews went there. So I'm glad it was a good turnaround. Let me ask you, when you were talking about when you went to Tilton and you were doing the groupings, what did you have to persuade people to agree in the format that you wanted to go with?
Yeah, so change is hard, change is personal. And I think that that's one of my strengths. I have the ability to connect with people. And I think leadership is about influencing and inspiring teachers to make the change. I mean, I have all teachers and all people who work in schools, they want to do what's best for kids, and they want to succeed, and they want their kids to succeed. So as you go through this process, and we were asking for huge changes at Tilton. I mean, it was totally revamping everything. You have to really develop a sense of urgency, which was sort of easy at Tilton, but then you also have to listen and figure out what the underlying issues are. Why are they so resistant? Is it a skill issue? Is it, you know, are they afraid? What is it that's the roadblock? And I think that I have a very good way of doing that. I think that, you know, people like me. They do. I have a good relationship with almost all of my staff. And so you have to be approachable and work with them. And, you know, that could have been a real roadblock for us if the teachers weren't on board, because, you know, they could have grieved it. There was a lot of, you know, changes there. And so we worked really hard. We met with them. We talked things through. I think that listening and really meeting people where they are is the most important part of getting that change. And I think you have to go for the quick wins too. If you can get a couple quick wins in there, you can start to build momentum. And you have to sort of figure out, the other thing is that I think that's important, is you figure out who's, you know, your people who are going to do it before you even finish your sentence. Some people need the data. Some people will come along after everyone else. And then, you know, there's those that are going to drag their feet. And you have to know who your players are and how to approach them. And I think one of my strengths is to be able to look at people and understand their motivations and figure out where they are in that spectrum and meet them where they are.
If you had to take one of those innovative ideas, how would you scale it across the district?
So we're doing that. So we had an old model of integrated classrooms at Tilton when we started. which was, to me, it was odd. We had dual certified teachers, which meant I was a third grade teacher, but I also had a special ed license. So we called them integrated teachers, and we said, oh, great, now you can put on 2 hats. That makes you can be the special ed teacher and the classroom teacher, which was a little mind-boggling, to be honest, with when I first got there. So we have now, so we changed that, and we changed our special ed model there. And now we're pushing it out through the district. We've done that with most of our schools, and we're phasing that into the last school in the next school year. I think it really, first of all, you have to work very closely with the principal for scheduling. I think that's one thing that's super important with all special ed stuff. I think that scheduling with the principals is one of the most important components that I do, because scheduling can make or break services as well as your personnel levels, how many teachers you need. But the other thing is to have a consensus, to talk about it. I meet every month with every building, and so we've used that time to really talk about it and figure out what would work and what didn't. We also revamped the high school services, and there was a lot of resistance because people have been doing it for 10 years. So I think just taking time to listen to people, to figure out where they are in the process and work through it with them and be approachable, because sometimes people are afraid to say what that roadblock is. So you really need to be approachable so people can come to you and say, this is my issue with it, and you can problem solve with them. And so there was a lot of problem solving and a lot of hand holding. And I think, that's one of the things through this outage. The first 3 weeks, our teachers were scared. I mean, they've never done this. We have a little bit of our special ed teachers. I've looked at yours. You guys have some, the bulk of your teachers are a little bit younger than ours. So we had a lot of teachers closer to retirement who aren't as comfortable with technology. I spent hours on Zooms, and we also did almost flexible grouping for our teachers. We gave different options. We gave, there was speech only meetings, there was grade level meetings, there was building meetings, there was sub-separate meetings. We took every sort of configuration and met with them so people felt comfortable. If they didn't feel comfortable in their whole, their building meeting, we had, elementary meetings so that they could come to that. If they didn't feel comfortable with that, we had the, academic support meetings. We had our social emotional. We had all the different ones, and they were welcome to choose which one so that they could find the comfort zone of people where they felt like they could bring up what was bothering them or what was tough for them. So, I think it's a lot of listening, and it's a lot of hand holding, and it's a lot of coaching, and it's a lot of cheerleading. I mean, I think one of the things I've done a ton of during this outage is cheerleading. I mean, that's, they're doing the hard work, and you've got to help them, and you've got to give them the supports, and you've got to give them the resources. And you also have to give them motivation as well as the sense that they're doing it right, because they want that feedback.
Does anyone have something that they might want to ask Pam regarding that question? Carol, did you? I saw your mic on.
Say that again?
Did you have a question because your mic was on?
No, I did not have a question. I thought that Pam answered that quite thoroughly, and I agree with her that the personal issue is extremely important.
Okay.
Will's commentary. I think we can go on to the second question.
Thank you. Hi, Pam.
I do now.
So as Assistant Superintendent of Pupil Personnel Services, you will be responsible for overseeing any harassment, bullying, and Title IX issues. Tell us in depth about an issue you responded to in one of those areas.
Okay. So I think the first step when you're dealing with that is to make sure that you follow the regulations and you do it by the book. We have had our share of those, as everyone does. We had one, I'm trying to think of how to say it without divulging too much personal information in the situation, right? So we had a family that has accused us, the special ed department in particular, of harassment, and we had to do an investigation of that. And it was difficult, you know, because teachers get very upset because they feel as if they're doing what's best for kids. It was a complicated situation because we had filed multiple times on the family and they were accusing us of harassment by that. So we had to do an investigation, which we did. We went through it step by step. We interviewed all of the parties. We did a full bullying investigation. And I think in the end, it worked out well for us because in doing that, we were able to show the family that we were taking their claims seriously. I think that's important. I think that when people make those claims, it's coming from some sort of perceived or actual wrong. And so to move forward with the families that make those claims, you have to make sure that you are really taking it seriously, that you are following the procedures, that you're interviewing everyone, that you're giving them their opportunity to speak. I think that's very important in these. A lot of these cases where families are alleging bullying, harassing, they want to be heard. And I think the most important step in the bullying and harassing process is not even the outcome so much as it's giving the families an opportunity to be heard and to try to use that as a platform to rebuild the relationship. Because when there are bullying allegations, it means there's a big breakdown in your relationship with that family. So I think that's an important piece to the bullying, any of the bullying harassment investigations.
So you talked about moving forward with the families. What would be your most important takeaway from this experience?
So I think one of the tactics I've used when you have a breakdown like this is to sort of, you know, and I said it in my other interview, I think falling on your sword per se sometimes is what families want. We're not always right. They're not always right. You know, people complain about parents and I say, yeah, but they're not always wrong. And that's true. You know, just because they're expressing their concerns doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I think that validating their feelings and their concerns is really important. And I think that when you do that, it disarms them a little bit. It allows you to move forward in the conversation. And I think one of the things I've learned as a leader is that you are not always wrong. And you got to check your ego at the door, because if you don't, you're going to miss some opportunities. So I think that's one of the things that I've worked really hard with families. And I will say, I have rebuilt a lot of trust with our families. When I first came in to April, we were averaging at least one complaint with PRS a month. Knock on some wood, I haven't had one this year. And I think that is because of the trust we've built with families. Families will come to us with issues and we can work on them. We're not always going to see eye to eye, but I think it's important that families feel that, one, you're going to listen to them, two, that you have an open mind about the situation, no matter what the past history is. And three, that you want to move forward and do what's best for their child.
What, if any, policy changes would you recommend as a result?
So, you know, we've actually revamped almost every policy and procedure we had because we didn't have any. So we one of the things we did with the filings of 51As is that we had put in, which we didn't have before, a policy of calling the families, explaining why. An administrator will call the family and explain why we are filing and what our concerns are. And, you know, and just say, look, we're not, we can't investigate. It's not our job. We are mandated reporters. And I think that sort of a little bit helps parents to understand where you're coming from, as opposed to them just getting the call from DCF. So that was an important change that we made, and it really doesn't make it easier, and that's a difficult call to make, and I've made them many times, but it does, at least you're not blindsiding them, and it helps a little bit with the trust.
So what steps did you take to educate your staff, the students, the families about this change?
So we actually, you know, we talked about the change at different staff meetings. And I've talked about parents at the CPAC meeting that, you know, that was a step we were going to start taking when we did a CPAC meeting around the bullying and harassing. That was one of the topics of one of our CPAC meetings. So, you know, I think that that's not a change you're going to put out broadly, but when you do make bigger changes, I think that you have to make sure that you're communicating any policy changes frequently and often. I think the other thing is you have to remember, just like with kids, if you tell your staff something once, they're not going to remember it. So you have to monitor what's important, and you also have to, you know, keep giving that same message and be consistent about the message until that change happens in that policy or procedure.
Great, thank you. Susan?
Anybody have further questions on that, Danielle, that they want to ask any committee members?
I do have a question.
I have a question.
I'm gonna, Doc, let's let the school committee do their questioning.
Yes,
So Carol, you go ahead.
Yes, just a brief one. Pam, have you ever had a complaint against a staff member? And if so, how have you handled that?
Yep, we have. We've had several. I think, first of all, the superintendent is the first person you call. Then you call HR, because their specialty is that. And I think that, you know, I'm not an HR specialist. So one of the things I learned very quickly is if it is out of my depth, that I need to make sure I get everyone else involved. And I think, so that's one of the steps that you take as HR. I get them involved and make sure you're following the procedures to the law, letter of the law. I think that, you know, there are guidelines and steps in place for a reason. And in these situations, you have to rely on them. I think it's very difficult when you have a staff, because sometimes, you know, it's not founded and it's hurtful to them. So I think that you have to make sure that you treat it with the utmost sensitivity, discretion, and confidentiality, because you never want to, you know, ruin someone's career like that. And I think that is very easily done in a school system. So those are very delicate situations. And I think that you have to proceed with caution.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Pam. As an assistant superintendent, you will work closely with the superintendent and school committee members, which require effective communication. What areas of communication are strengths for you?
So I think communication is a strength for me. I think that, you know, I have very good relationships with both my previous superintendent and my new superintendent, as well as the school committee. You know, I think that open and honest communication is the key to success. I think when you have issues and you're in a crisis situation, I think being open and honest and detailing the how you got there is important. I think communication with staff, I think they appreciate honesty, and I think they can see through you if you're not honest. And that doesn't mean you have to tell them everything all of the time, but I do think having open and honest lines of communication with everyone is a key to success. I think that I have been able to build open lines of communication with my staff. You know, over the last 4 years, we've made a lot of changes and we've come really far in the special ed department in Haverhill, as well as I also, you know, work with food services, transportation, nursing. And I think that to be able to manage all of that, you have to have open lines of communication. People have to feel like if there's a problem, they can come to you. I think that's really important in this pupil personnel role, because you know, a little problem can turn into a huge issue if you're not communicating. So I think one of the things of communication is to build trust with your staff and your teams, to be able to come to you and say, I think we have a problem brewing, and to have the trust in you that you're going to help them solve that issue. And I think I have that with my staff now in Haverhill and all of my team. I think that's really important, to be approachable. Because if you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it, and it'll blow out of control.
Thank you. So also let me ask you, how would you navigate a situation where members of the school committee have differing opinions than each other, which we can all say?
So I have to say, that's definitely, you know, I've definitely run into that in Haverhill. I think that you have to have conversations and understand their point of view. I also think that if you are coming from a place where you are discussing data, what's best for kids, I think that helps the conversation. And at the end of the day, you know, the school committee is there to support us as administrators and help us and guide us. They know what's going on in the community. They're part of the community. So I think that, you know, their opinion and and especially, I mean, this committee has a lot of people who have strong backgrounds in education. So their opinions, you know, are valued, I think. And I think you have to weigh it all as you have those conversations and just talk through the issues and the different points of view. I mean, there are always going to be two sides to a situation, and there are always going to be, when you're looking at a problem, there are always multiple ways to solve it. And I think our jobs is to figure out what the best one is and move forward. And I think it's great to have different opinions.
Thank you. Did anyone else have questions?
Just one observation. We all smiled when we heard the question about having differences, because we do have differences frequently. As you know, the school committee sets policy. How would you guide the school committee in setting a policy that you feel is consistent with the needs of the children in the schools?
So I think one of the big things with policy is that it's that's where your procedures come down from, right? You have the policy which directs your procedures in the school. And I think that, you know, as you look at policies, you want to look at laws, regulations, especially in the special ed world and pupil personnel. There are so many regulations, and you have to be well versed, and you have to know what, you know, we had an issue with our handbook, our bullying policy on our handbook wasn't up to date. So we had to update that policy. I think it was last year. And one of the big things with that was we had to make sure that it followed the letter of the law. So I think one of the big pieces in this department is to make sure that I'm advising the school committee in the correct, you know, laws and regulations and compliance issues, so that your policy is in compliance. Because if it's not, I mean, that it was actually another thing that we had to change once because of a bullying and harassment situation that we dealt with. So I think that one of the most important things for someone in my position to do is to be able to give the school committee an overview of what the regulations and compliance issues are for the state or federal guidelines. And then I think to be able to give you a sense of how that policy will affect staff, teachers, students especially, and what the pros and cons of that are. Because there's pros and cons to every decision you make. And I think weighing those and laying out all of those options and all of those ramifications for school committees is an important piece of the role.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee on Ms. Gravellisi's question? Okay, we'll go on to Dr. Garcia.
Morning, Pam. Welcome to the second round of interview. Congratulations on making that
Thank you.
round. My question to you is, as you know, an important aspect of your job will be guiding principals and curriculum directors or program directors to ensure their jobs are well done and effective relationships exist between them and parents and community members. What are the 3 most important traits you feel administrators should portray to ensure these relationships are effective?
So the 3 traits. So I think that open communication, honest communication is really important with your principals. In Haverhill, I have to work close. I mean, obviously I work closely. I think that I'm not an assistant superintendent in Haverhill. So I have to rely on my relationship with the principals. I think that anytime, and we've done a lot of programming changes, we've implemented a lot of new programs. But when I walk out of that building, I have to make sure that that principal and I are on the same page and that we're lockstep so that he or she can make sure that they're implementing the new programming, the changes, whatever it is we're trying to do. So I think that the key components of that are open and honest communication, trust. I think that you have to build that trust with one another. I think I've really worked hard with my principals because they want their buildings to run smoothly, and you're asking them to make changes in their building. And so building those relationships, I think building relationships with principals is the key, it's a key component. And I think it's communication, I think it's trust, and I think it's being open and honest with them. You're not always going to see eye to eye, but one of the things that I pride myself on is having an open conversation and being willing to look at their point of view and say, you know what, you might be right on that, and a give and take. I think that's important as well when you're working with the principals. But I have really great relationships with all my principals, and that doesn't mean we see eye to eye on every issue. But I understand where they're coming from, and I think it's important to have the ability to, even if you vehemently disagree on this issue on Monday, that on Tuesday when I come back for the next issue, that we have a sense that we're working together and we're in it together and we can move on. And I really feel like I've built those relationships with my principals in Haverhill, and we work really well together. I've worked, and Haverhill's very different than Revere. Revere is one of the best urban districts in the state. There's no doubt about that. Haverhill's on the other side of that, and we're rebuilding, and we've done amazing things over the last few years. But you have to do that through relationships with your principals. And we've had 4 turnaround schools, and I've worked closely with those principals, and we've done remarkable things. I mean, the things that we've done at the high school have been phenomenal, but you have to do that by working together. And I feel like you really need to build that relationship and a sense of trust with your principals. They have to know that they have to know that you have their back, that at the end of the day, you're going to support them and give them the resources and the skill base that they need to move forward.
Can I just clarify that question for you, Pam?
Yep.
So I think what Lorenzo's trying to get at is the effective relationships that principals have with parents and community.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to reread the question that he read to you. An important aspect of your job will be guiding principals and curriculum or program directors to ensure their jobs are well done and effective relationships exist between them and the parents and community members. What are the 3 most important traits you feel administrators should portray to ensure that these relationships are effective?
Right, sorry. So I went off. So I think we've done, you know, one of the things as an administrator that you need to portray is, I mean, it's similar, right? You need to be, families need to know that you care, that you're invested in their children. Families need to know that you're honest and you're going to work hard for their children. Families, you need to build a sense of trust and meet families where they are. I think that in Haverhill, we've done a lot of, like at the high school, we've done supper club, which is a little bit different than your traditional open house, and it's fun. And we invite them in, and it's kind of like a theme night. We did a Halloween theme. They did a math theme. The math department did a game night theme. And so when principals and administrators portray a sense of being interested beyond just the academics, I think that really builds relationships with families. I think families want to know that their child is more than just a data point, and that, you know, you're invested in the whole child. I think that's important for families.
Dr. Garcia, did you have some follow-ups?
I do have a follow-up. For each one of those 3 traits, what's one way you would guide administrators to improve his or her practice?
So when we've worked with the turnaround principals, we work a lot on community engagement and family engagement with them. And we have really talked to them about outreach and building relationships with families. And we have worked a lot with our turnaround principals in building relationships and understanding families and meeting families where they are. And I think that's one of the things that we've done a good job of coaching all of our principals in, as well as, you know, what are our community engagement strategies and how are we meeting families where they are? I think that's super important. I think that, you know, if we're not going out to the community to see, to meet them there, I think we're missing big opportunities. And also, anytime you can do something that's a little non-academic with families to meet them where they are, I think is great. We've worked hard with our principals, and a lot of times, you know, when there's an issue with the family, I will go with them to meet with the families. I'll meet with them in a family to help them and coach them through those situations with the special ed parents. I think that's important. To be able to sit with parents and the principal so that families see that you're on the same page, and also to give that support to principals as they talk to parents.
Okay, so that's great. So the last follow-up question is, how would you monitor for improvement?
So, you know, I think that we do a lot of work with our principals. I work very closely with all of our principals. And I think as far as improvement, I think that, you know, you have to monitor it, you have to be there, you have to be in meetings, you have to show up and see what they're doing for community engagement. You have to go to those events. You have to go to their family nights. You have to sit through, you know, meetings with them and parents. I think it's important that you're present so that you can see the improvements that principals are making. I think, and you know, when we're looking at making changes in buildings, it's important to be there to see how it's going and to troubleshoot with principals. And I think monitoring, knowing if people are improvement is about monitoring it in person and being there, you know, on a really regular basis to see the improvements as they come.
Does anyone have any follow-up questions to her?
I do. Pam, as members of the school committee, we sometimes get calls from somewhat irate parents or grandparents about their dissatisfaction with the special needs services that their children are getting. Now, we usually have no knowledge at all about what's going on in that particular case. Sometimes we might have an inkling. So we probably would call you and say, this is going on in such and such a case. And what is it that you can do about it? How would you handle that?
That happens all the time. So I think the first thing you do is you call the parent. I think you listen to the parent. I think the amount of time that you should spend on the phone with a parent, I don't think is a lot. I mean, I think you should do that on a regular basis. And I think the first thing you do when any parent is upset is you listen, and you listen some more, and you try to diffuse them. I think a lot, like I've said earlier, a lot of the issues with parents is that they feel, right or wrong, that no one's listening to them and no one cares. So you really need to take the time, either invite them into the office or on the phone, to really listen to their concerns. Then you have to go out to the school and figure out exactly what's going on and figure out why they think this is the case. And then you have to take a little bit of action to make them feel better. But I do think that getting to the root of why they're upset is very important. And they're not upset over nothing. There is something at some point that triggered this line of, where it got to the school committee. I mean, the hope is that you can build relationships so it doesn't get to the school committee. And I think that I've done that. I think that the school committee in Haverhill would say that they're getting a lot less calls about special ed. But I think the biggest thing is when parents are calling a school committee, it's because they are mad, and there's a reason they're mad. They just don't make it up out of the blue. So you got to figure out what that is and work with them and really listen. I think that's, to build that empathy with parents is very important.
Well, sometimes they might be mad at you.
Yep, that's true. That has happened. And again, I think that it's not pleasant to call a parent that doesn't like you at the moment. And I'm not always going to see eye to eye on what the services should be. But I think that once you call them and you have a conversation and you listen to them and you apologize, not for maybe, that we did something wrong, but I apologize that you're upset. Let's see. And you go there with them and you say, I want to make this work with you. What can we do to move forward? I think that is very disarming. And I do believe I have a personality that parents respond to that. And I've really been able to diffuse a lot of situations because of that. It doesn't always work, but I think that's your first line of defense, is showing parents empathy. I think one thing that can't be underestimated is parents of special needs students. They have a long road ahead of them. And a lot of times it's not necessarily what we've done, but they've got a lot on their plate, and you have to meet them where they are. And you have to know who their student is. I mean, if you call that parent and you don't know that their student's a nonverbal autistic child, then you have no idea where they're coming from. So you need to know that child, and what their background is and what their daily life is like, and the struggles they have with that child. I mean, special ed parents, they have a lot on their plate. And I think that if you can find a way to take a little bit off of that and be empathetic towards them and give them even just moral support, I think that goes a long way with them.
Thank you.
Okay, Pam, that brings us to the end of our questions. Is there a thought or two or anything that you want to share with the committee before we move forward?
So I just want to say, I'm not applying anywhere else. I have not applied anywhere else. I started in Haverhill. Ms. Ty, actually,
Yeah.
I remember being in your office when you hired me. And so it felt like this was my job when Josh left. And Josh and I, by the way, are very friendly, and we go to a lot of the same sorts of, like, he did the special ed leadership cohort. I did the special ed leadership cohort. I was, I think, a year behind him. So I know him and I know the role. I've done a lot of the role. In my time in Haverhill, I've accomplished a lot, and I'm not, it was hard for me to decide to even apply because I'm not done with what I wanted to achieve there. But I just thought this was a great opportunity, and I have the most respect for Revere as a district. But during my time in Haverhill, I have done a lot with not a lot of extra money. I probably not got much in the way of extra positions or anything, and I've able to bring back a lot of kids from out of district, revamp programs, revamp our social emotional. I've actually tuitioned students in, and I've done that by my leadership skills. I've done that, well, by my technical knowledge, but as well as my leadership skills. I've been able to create a culture within my staff that they want to change. When I got to Haverhill, the first thing I was given was a document from our tiered focus monitoring with 26 compliance issues that we had to do corrective actions. And that's a tough place to start. And my teachers and staff and administrators have worked really hard. And we just did our last one, and we had 4 partial findings, which is huge. And I've done that through my leadership. And I've done that also budget neutral. And I think that I am a great candidate for this position. And I would love to be the next assistant superintendent of pupil personnel. And I think that I would do a good job for Revere. So, you know, I've done a lot of things. Like, I watched a school committee, and you guys were talking about community eligibility. We just did community eligibility last year. And we worked really hard to find each direct cert kid and make it work. And it's an amazing program, and we're thrilled to have it in Haverhill. So I've done a lot of the technical stuff, and I think that my leadership style would be a good fit for Revere in this position.
Thank you very much, Pam. We really appreciate the time, and we will be in touch.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Committee members, we have our second candidate is present in the waiting room. I can bring her in now unless anybody needs a break or anything. We're good. Okay. And just so that you know, I know that we've gone through the process, but I'm going to reiterate those when the next candidate is in the room, just so that they have the benefit of hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Good morning, Janelle. How are you?
Good morning.
Janelle, I want to welcome you to our school committee meeting. Present with us is the entire school committee. And I know I sent you an email outlining what the process would be like. And I just wanted to reiterate that for the benefit of the folks who might be watching at home on YouTube. So we're going to use more of a kind of conversational approach to this meeting. We've got just 4 broad questions that we're going to ask you. School committee secretary woman Stacy Rizzo is going to ask you the first question, and she'll have a couple of follow-ups. The 2 of you will have a bit of a dialogue, and then she'll invite the other committee members to ask any questions that they have that are related to what you and Mrs. Rizzo had just spoken about. They won't ask you some far afield. And that you and Mrs. Rizzo will talk for about 10 minutes. Then we'll have the questions from the rest of the committee. And then we'll move on to the second question, which will be asked by Dr. Mokaba, followed by the same process. The 2 of you will have a bit of a dialogue for about 10 minutes. We'll invite the committee to ask any additional questions. And then we'll move on to the third question, which will be asked by Vice Chair of the committee, Susan Gravelisi. Same process. And we'll end with the fourth question asked by Dr. Garcia. Does that sound okay?
Yes. Excuse me, yes.
And then at the very end, we'll invite you to, if you have any final thoughts for us or anything else that you want to share.
Okay, thank you.
And I do just want to remind the committee members again that if you're not speaking, your microphone should be muted. So with that, I will pass it to Mrs. Rizzo.
Good morning.
Janelle, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
Would you please describe an innovative way in which you successfully solved a special education problem?
Okay, so when I arrived at Walton Public Schools, we had a large number of students moving to the most restrictive setting. And so what I started to do was really go through from general education classrooms to, we have 6 separate programs, links, which is a language space, for connections, which is a developmental. And so one of the things that I did do was put together what you call a change of placement process, which means that it sat down everyone at a table where we looked at data from the students' progress, what implementations have you put in place? For example, if they're English language learners, how long have they been in the country? Number 2, what does the IEP look like? Number 3, there's a social and emotional piece. Number 4, working with the parent, the teacher, and the community members. So my first year, we had close to 60 students requesting to move to a more restricted setting. In my 5th year, we have close to 20 students. The reason why, because when we sat down and looked at the data and looking at the interventions, it realized that once you put the interventions in place, it was a more of a team approach. Previously, it was more of an individual sending a student to a most restricted setting. Now it's saying, no, all of you are responsible. The way that I did that was also looking at professional development, which means ensuring that everyone understands about Common Core for all students. Number 2, ensuring that all teachers understand about English language learners development and the types of looking at the access testing. So when an English language learner takes a test, and we receive the results, how is that being implemented back into that classroom? Number 3, making sure that everyone is, sorry, excuse me.
That's quite all right.
It's allergy season time.
Yeah.
So, excuse me. So in addition to that, make sure that everyone's sitting at the table where they became experts in the room. So that one of the things I put together was a table. So we looked at access testing, we looked at student information, we looked at the different protocols. So in the past 5 years, people can talk about the change of placement process, which also increased the number of students' achievement. Number 2, it gave students opportunities not being in a restricted setting. Number 3, exposed them to more of an inclusion setting. And when we spoke to parents, we began to bring the parents part into this process, because we began to explain to them the reason why we're doing this process. Why is it important to look at the data from home perspective and for classrooms? So it's more of a team's perspective. So it's a team opportunity. It's more collaborative. So one of the things we're talking about, leadership, the classroom teachers became more leadership and understanding came. These are the standards that I'm teaching. These are the materials that I'm using. This is how I'm implementing it. This is what I need for my classroom. But also when it talks to a building principal perspective, a building principal is going to say, well, this is how we're using the resources. This is how that we're ensuring that all teachers are being trained, all paraprofessionals for that. So it's more of a holistic piece. So that's what that's to me, I think I'm more proud, best thing I'm proud of. Because my thought process has always been preparing students for college and career. Although you might have an IEP, does not mean you cannot achieve. I am a special education student. My mother's a math and science teacher. So when your parent's a teacher, she says, yes, you have an IEP, but does not mean you cannot achieve. So I'm really paying it forward. And so one of the things I've always explained to people, yes, you have an IEP, but look at the materials that you're putting into place so that can be more organized. Because the key thing is that as kids move from a preschool to 2nd grade, ensuring that students are reading on grade level. Do we have a reading specialist? How do you support that? When it's time to be hiring, do we look at, okay, we need somebody who's Orton Gillingham, which is type of reading license. So those things begin to change a little bit differently, because it helps you look at resources and how do you, 'you, you, 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 you,
Well, there's always obstacles in getting people to have change. So how do you persuade those people, especially when it came to your change of place program?
Well, number one, I am a stickler. What does the special education license board says from the state and federal? It is not what Janelle is saying. It says that from the federal and the state and the Massachusetts licensure state says that you need to look at your data before you move a student to a more restrictive setting. So one of the things that I did do is I go online to the Department of Ed and I look at the state law. I copy and paste so I can say, this is what the state is asking us for to do. Number two, it took 5 years. The first year it was like, oh, she's really just joking. She's not asking that. But one of the things that I did do is I'm consistent. When I send out an email to the people, I put what you call protocols. In the protocol is really a handout because I always say teachers are like students. There's an auditory person, there's a visual person. So when I send anything for the change of placement, it was documents. So the first document was, what does the process look like? The second document included, how do you collect the data? The third document talked about when working together collaboratively, so that when we sat down together, we had all 3 documents in place because time is limited during school time. So when you meet together, this is the requirements. And so whenever someone brings a change of placement to me, they will have to send to me their binder, their documentation, and I sit down with them and say, okay, please walk through your thought process, because it also empowers teachers, empowers administrators, empowers families, because you're providing that data so it becomes personalized, making that instruction, the educational placement, the best for all students.
Hey, so if you would you find that you could take your change of place program and scale it across the whole district for other, such as ELL students or other programs?
In Waltham Public Schools, we have close to like 39% English language learners, similar to here. So currently we're working with ELL and special, what you call dual identified students. So that same process can be repeated across the board. Because number two, when you look at the statewide curriculum map for English language learners, the statewide curriculum frameworks for subject matter, that is really what the state is asking for. So it's really looking at what the state mandates, and you can bring it to whatever district you're going to. Because when you look at the MCAS accountability, it says special ed, it says English language learners, so it can repeat it throughout the time. And the key thing is if you break it apart as a student, a teacher explanation, it can repeat it over and over again, because it's also about the teaching and learning cycle, which means you identify the standard, you look at the intervention, you put the intervention in place. So that's continuous over and over again, so it can be at any school district throughout the country.
Thank you, Janelle. At this time, I'm going to ask if any of my colleagues have a question pertaining to that.
Just an observation. You know, when I was a teacher at Revere High School, one of the things that used to drive me crazy was teachers using as an excuse, our kids can't do that. Did you run into any of those problems?
Oh, yes.
You said that. I think that was probably a pretty common one. I liked what you had to say about that. It doesn't matter if you have an IEP, you can still be prepared for college or career or whatever it is that you choose to do with your life. How do you deal with people who are really so obstinate?
Well, this is my 18th year in education. I call it pledging teaching and pledging administration. So I am the biggest cheerleader. One of the things that I do is I like to look online for resources for teachers, plus look at the resources that teachers currently have in their room. And a lot of times teachers like to share. So one of the things that I like to do is visit, well, previously before this computerized process, to visit teachers in their classroom, because you can see what their strengths, what their weaknesses, what they value, and you build that relationship first. One of the things that I have done in my previous is to visit classrooms, visit buildings, be visible. Now, when there's a computer process, it's really, you have to invite them through a link or a Zoom, but it's like in the olden, it's something I've seen in olden times, we used to go visit buildings and be accessible and listen to people's concerns. I think one of the most important things I have learned is number one, put together a plan, a 3-year plan to say, this is what the change of placement looks like. Number two, put together a professional development so everyone knows this is the expectation. Number three, constantly being visible, because like I said before, we have people who are visual learners who need hands-on, to some people who just like to email you and say, Janelle, I have a concern. So it's also just being approachable and honest and explain to everyone, I understand this is new, but this is going to be beneficial for not only for the students, but also for your classroom setting.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Okay, moving on to Dr. McCarver.
Thank you. Janelle, as the Assistant Superintendent for Pupil Personnel Services, you will be responsible for overseeing any harassment, bullying, and Title IX issues. Tell us in depth about an issue you responded to in one of those areas.
Well, in my leadership role, I'm probably the second highest Black administrator in the district, and we had a racial issue. And so one of the things that I had to do was listen to both sides to hear what was the concerns, because it was the student population who were African American descent and Latino descent didn't feel that the high school was listening to what was going on in the community. And one of the things I had to do was, a lot of kids were very intense. They were we're going to do this. And I said, wait a minute now. Number one, you got to think about what happens. The mayor's going to say, we might call the police. So let's think about how can we do this productively. So one of the things the kids were saying, well, no one was listening to us when this email was sent out, or now these kids are Facebook and Zoom. I said, well, let's think about how can we plan something to sit down together to talk to the mayor, talk to the teachers, the school committee, or what's going on. So that's first thing, is how do you calm the seas, but at the same time, you're listening to students, but also to the safety of the community. The next piece is we're working with the students who had the concern. It says, well, you need to sit down and put together a program. So what they did do was invite the community members to really talk about race, number one, about being in low expectation classrooms. The students who are brown or minority were saying, look, we're in classrooms, but we're not being raised to a certain level. And so that certain piece, the kids were basically advocating, saying, we want to go to college too. But if we look at our classroom and look at somebody else's classroom, the expectations were a little bit differently. So from that piece was listen to the students, but also it said, listen to your teachers. From out of that became a cultural proficiency where, you know, I understand it. When I walk in the room, sometimes I might be the only Black administrator in the room. I understand that. It is what it is. But I also have responsibility to say, number one, you have to listen to your teachers because sometimes they don't know. This might be the first time they work with a person of color. This might be the first time educating. So you have to give them a break too. But how do you sit down to work together? So those pieces about taking a serious matter, but breaking it apart and saying, how can we work together to support all? And that's pretty much what I've done. This is my 18th year in education. I started off as a pharmacy major in school. My mother's a math and science teacher. And so when I came home, she's like, you got 1 year to figure it out. Why don't you become a substitute teacher? So I became a substitute teacher in a special education classroom. And that was probably my best experience. So I'm bringing a different perspective because I remember in college where I had a lot of cousins who could not pass the first entrance examination to take a college examination so that they can be prepared. So I'm always thinking about when you graduate from school, will you be prepared, and bringing that viewpoint. So I'm always thinking about race because in this day and time, you can't leave that. You know, I mean, my color, whatever it is, but also I have to explain to students, there are good Black people, there are good white people. There's good Black people, bad people, there's both. But how do you sit down and work together? And to me, that's the key thing, because this pandemic has shown that we all have to work together.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, we also have to think about how do you move forward. So this is what I've done in my 18th year in education.
Thank you. So You gave us a lot and sort of answered this question. So what would you say that your most important takeaway from this experience working with your students of color in the situation you described?
Number one, making sure that we're communicating as soon as the issue happens, ensuring that every person in that area sit down and have a conversation. The issue happened 2 years ago, which means I wasn't there 2 years ago, but it still was festering. So I believe that as soon as it happens, I know it's difficult, but sit down and have a conversation then, so kids can understand, or anybody in the community can understand that we are through it, that we understand it, and that we're moving forward. And this is what the professional development looks like.
Great. Now, were there any policy changes that you recommended as a result of that?
Yes, number one was looking at when you're looking at hiring perspective, and also to looking inside the school district to see how can we increase the number of minorities or a diverse candidates in the school system. Number two, putting together professional development so people can pass the MTEL, because in order to increase the number of diverse candidates, you have to pass the MTEL. Number three, working with MPDE, which is called Massachusetts for Diversity Increasing for Education, so that you're working with all different school systems so that we have a think tank. So not just your school district, but other school districts working beside that. So those things, policies that have come into place.
Great. And then finally, what steps would you take to educate the staff, the students, and the families about those changes that you just mentioned?
The first piece is number one, using a letter to inform them about these are the new opportunities to learn about cultural proficiency as a district. Number two, for students to see, like, we are trying to increase the number of diverse students, for teachers, but also recommending students say, look, this is a great profession. Why don't you become a teacher? And number three, working with community members so that they can understand about the different race issues, so that it's more of a collective being, not one group is on one side, one group is on the other side, so they all work together. So those things that be able to communicate piece. It's really about a collective measure.
Thank you. Are there any members of the school committee that would like to ask questions?
Yes. Have you ever had, I'm sure you must have, but have you ever had a specific either harassment complaint, either sexual harassment or racial harassment complaint against a staff member? And how have you dealt with that?
Yes, I have both. The first piece, I create what you call a document. So the document is really finding out the person who is doing an acquisition. So one of the things I do, I put in the report exactly what happened. Number two, whoever they're accusing, give them an opportunity to sit down and explain from their side. And number three, working with the human resource officer, because it could be some disciplinary side of it, so that I at least have that information put into place. And so that's what I have done in my role as assistant director.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is Susan Gravelisis.
Hi, Janelle.
Hi,
Good to see you again.
good to see you. Just trying to see on the screen, sorry.
As an assistant superintendent, you will work closely with the superintendent and school committee, which requires effective communication. What areas of communications are strengths for you?
My strength is technology. I am a Google, not a Google queen, but I like putting together PowerPoints and documents using Google platform. The reason for that is to basically educate the school committee members, the superintendent, so that they understand that the research from that platform, and having a plan in place. So that when you're going into the meeting, you really thought about any key areas. It could be about human resource, hiring individuals. It could be looking at the resources for instruction, professional development. So you have a thought process. I like to be prepared for a meeting, because I also like to be respectful of people's time. So my thought processes have been showing technologies using those platforms.
Thank you. And How would you navigate a situation where members of the school committee have differing opinions than each other?
It's like working with different buildings. Number one, building a relationship prior to this disagreement between one another, and do almost like a separate conversation with them to find out where the strengths, where's the weaknesses, where the concerns, so that you can understand where they're coming from. Because sometimes the group dynamics, that maybe their voice is not being heard, so that building that relationship prior to that, but working with each person and finding out, okay, what are your disagreements? What is the concern, so that I can do some research prior to the school committee group to have that prepared. I always say that each school is like going into a different house. This one house, you might have to say good morning. The other one, you have to make sure you give them a call, give them a heads up. So it just depends on what each superintendent likes to have. School committee
Thank
member.
you. Do any other members have any questions on that for Janelle?
Well, you know, we often have disagreements among members of the school committee about, and we're the ones who set the policy. And sometimes we have different opinions based on our experiences or just upon our personalities. So how do you think you would help us to come together and settle on something that we can all live with?
One of my strengths is to listen. Give each individual person time to speak on their behalf and say, okay, tell me your concerns. And I listen from each group. That's my first step. Then my second step, when I look at my notes from, if it's 5 people, look at the 5 people notes and see there's a commonalities. Say, look, you said this, for example, time. Each 5 people said time. So say, these are things you can agree upon. Can we work on this? And then one thing that they have disagreements, say, what can your non-negotiables, and then work from there. But my key strength is listening. In the world of special ed, you're always navigating, you're always listening, you're always trying to figure out what's the best medium place. But the key thing is also to listening and seeing what other policies that you have in place and say, okay, this is in this policy right here. This is how it's going to be supported.
Thank you.
Good morning, Janelle. This is Lorenzo Garcia. The question I have for you is, in this capacity or role as an assistant superintendent of people and personnel, you will be guiding principals and curriculum program directors to ensure that their jobs are well done and effective relationships exist between them and the parents and the community members. That's an important piece of your job, of this role. The question I have for you is, what are the 3 most important traits you feel administrators should portray to ensure these relationships are effective?
Number 1, be consistent. Number 2, be fair. And number 3, be knowledgeable in the process, because principals or administrators or school committee people are looking to you to guide.
Okay, so the follow-up question I have is, for each one of those 3 traits, what is one way you would guide the administrator to improve his or her practice?
Excuse me, I'm a previous building administrator. So one of the things that I would want in someone as assistant superintendent, having a plan in place so that when you meet with the building principal, that you be able to show, for example, that it could be social emotional learning. So you can show, like, this is what your building is working on. Let's have a conversation about your improvement plan to support social emotional learning, and that you'll be able to guide them in their process. But it's also a listening, saying, what are your concerns? So for example, a building administrator may have concerns with, we have new students coming in with social emotional issues. My staff is limited. How can I use my staff more effectively? So one of the things that I would ask for is say, okay, let's look at your paraprofessionals. How are you using your paraprofessionals in your building? Number 2, how are you working with your school adjustment counselors? Number 3, what outside providers? Because principals are always looking for extra staff. And you might have had the money for that, but let's look at what are different ways that you can use your resources within the building. So it's always being that person that can be, when I call you, I know I'm gonna, one of the principals always said to me, if I say something to you, you always, excuse me, a straight shooter, which means that I listen to you and I provide guidance along that way.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have for you is, as you know, part of this job also will consist of supervision, evaluating, monitoring, and to ensure that people continue to improve. So tell me a little bit about your strategy in terms of monitoring for improvement.
Well, number one, I look at the list of who I'm evaluating. And then at the beginning of the year, I meet with each person to really have a relationship and say, what are your concerns? What are your strengths? What are your goals for the year? Number two, I always call it professional development, looking at the areas of the person whom I'm evaluating. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What they can be supporting with. So for example, I had a teacher when I observed the first time, she needed support with data analysis. So the next time I met with her, I went online and found some data supports. So that say, I see this is your weakness. Let's look at a different data collection guide from that. So really looking at the student goal on the evaluation system, looking at the professional goal, and really work with them throughout the year or the year or 2 year plan. In addition to that, having professional development throughout the year to ensure that there's consistency within the district, because you want to ensure that everyone is making consistency on the different protocols or different state laws, so that you're building, empowering people throughout the year. And then when I do evaluations, what I do is I do a write-up first. After the observation, I email the particular person who I'm observing. I ask when would be a best time to do a reflection of the observation. And then after that, I will write up the observation. One of the things I do is I look at the standard from the state evaluation system, well, from a needs improvement, proficient, et cetera, and look at that language and say, this is what I see in the evaluation versus what the standard says. And it could be, first one talks about designing a lesson plan to support all learners. So I look at how you're developing your lesson and what things that needs to be supporting that. And then throughout the year, I do observations. And with my schedule, I try to put evaluations scheduling throughout the year in my Google Calendar. So when I'm visiting throughout the district, I have time to go observe them throughout the year, because educators would like someone to come to observe, but they like feedback throughout the year. And I believe that that's my strength of constantly looking at ways to improve people, but also listening to see where their supports are.
That was my last question. Does any member of the school committee have any follow-up questions?
Ms. Rizzo.
Yes, I do. Sometimes the school committee gets calls from parents or grandparents that in the special ed department is not doing well by their babies who are in school, and they call upon school committee members to make decisions that will perhaps they feel serve their children better. So it becomes a kind of political situation. They should not be calling us, but they do. And we are members of the community. So how do you deal with that? So if I called you and said, Mrs. So-and-so or Grandpa so-and-so is complaining about this and doesn't like the way they're doing it and doesn't feel they're getting the services, how would you handle that situation?
Well, number one, listen to the concerns that a parent reported to you first, and also two, they probably have a contact information where I can contact the grandparent or aunt, or uncle, or whoever, and then also find out if it's a school-related piece. It's also connecting back to the school to see the time to set up with the parent, but also is the parent allowed this person to talk on their behalf? Because we have to think about the confidentiality piece of it. I understand that grandma and auntie are concerned, but we also have to think about the confidentiality of the part. So also contact the parent and say, grandma has called, I want to know what are your concerns, and please put it in writing that we can talk to grandma. If you there's not a written letter from you, I'm sorry, but I can't talk to grandma. But one of the things you could do is also educate the parent to say, look at our website. So here's some the special education hand guide, which is on the Revere Public site. Also looking at, we do have the district curriculum piece, and also explain to parents, this is what the Common Core or whatever they're working on at that point in time. So also re-educate them at the same time. But parents or community members have to understand that there is a legal ramification about just talking on behalf of a student. It is a confidentiality piece that I can't just talk to anybody from that.
Thank you.
Mhm. Oh, Ms. Rizzo, sorry.
Thank you, Janelle. You spoke of the NPD,
Mhm.
and they have a community education project piece within them. I was wondering, and this is just out of curiosity, whereas, you know, family and community engagement is so important in all districts, is there any way you've implemented any of those projects formally or informally where you are?
Well, more so informally. When I always say, when a parent is advocating for the child, and a lot of and I say, you know what, you'd be a great classroom teacher, and here's the process. And I'm like, because you know they're very adamant, they know the law, they can tell you about the curriculum and everything. And I said, well, what are you currently doing? And they say, well, I'm working as a pair working at a grocery store. I said, well, you know what? Here's an opportunity to go to school to become a teacher. One of the things that we have to do is, a lot of people do not know about, there's money to go to school, there's teacher grants to go to school, there's money if you want to for housing. So we really have to educate how to become a teacher. And sometimes when you look at DESE website, it's hard to navigate. So it's almost re-educating them how to do that process. So it's really become a community person. I say this is my 18th year. I have no problem with sharing you how I passed the exam. So I put together study guides, how to pass the financial reading exam, the math exam, because I'm already here. So it's not like giving that information is going to hurt me. I try to pass it forward.
Thank you so much.
Nice.
Any other members? Okay, Janelle, we've reached the end of the questions.
I'm always like,
Really?
I know. Did you have any parting thoughts or anything else that you wanted to share with the school committee before we say goodbye?
well, one of the things I thought is my thought process and how I develop any professional plan. And so one of the things I always say, look at, what does the federal and state laws say? Because as assistant superintendent, you become the lead instruction for the Office of Pupil Personnel Services, which includes nursing, special ed, and especially social emotional learning. And so my thought process has always been looking at your strategic plan, which talks about make sure that the community members understand what's going on in the community. Number two, ensuring that this rigor in the classroom, because we're preparing all students for college and career. And my thought process has always been teaching and training along the way. Because being as the lead assistant superintendent in the district, you really have to think about the special ed laws and have to advocate and navigate. Because one of the things that people do not understand sometimes, well, why can't my student be in the most restrictive setting, or why can't, without having a due process? And so one of the things I've always have been is really advocating and supporting staff, community members along the way. Because the world is to prepare students for college and career, number one. But number two, looking at the IEP process, ensuring that it's being implemented with fidelity. Number three, ensuring that your staff members are supported, because being a special education teacher or a general education teacher or teacher overall, this is a difficult job. And I always say it is a craft. Teaching, being an administrator is a craft. So when I work with community members throughout my time, I'm always talking about how to support all students on a limited budget so that all students be prepared. So I one of the things I've done is looked over all your documentation and say, what can I do on day one because with this pandemic, you're saying, what can I do? And things that I have done, I've put together protocols to talk about compliance for special ed or ELL or general ed, providing professional development from pre-K to 12th grade and beyond, because you want to have a consistent model ensuring that students are receiving the education, the SEL standard, but also supporting families along the way. And that's what I think that's my strength, is really taking the most strategic plan and breaking it apart so that all members of the community can be able to explain what the school is doing. So thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you very much, Janelle, and we will be in touch in the coming days.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So we're still live on YouTube, but we are running a little bit early. Our next candidate is not yet in the waiting room. I'm going to suggest that we all mute our microphones and our cameras, and we could take a 10-minute break and then come back and go on with the third interview.
Sounds good.
We're still a few minutes early and Dr. Galucci has not entered the waiting room yet, so we'll just continue to hold. And I will let everybody know when he's joining us. He wasn't anticipated to start until 11.
Are we back? Go.
Not yet, Fred. We're waiting for Dr. Galucci to join the.
Okay, no, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Galucci is in the waiting room. I'm going to go ahead and let him in and we can resume.
Okay,
Okay,
Hi, everyone.
Galucci, how are you?
hi, Ruth.
So I know I sent you an email outlining the format for this round of interviews, and I'm just going to reiterate that for the school committee who is here present with us today, and also for any viewers who might
Sorry,
be.
Diane, I can't hear you. Hold on one sec. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you.
Richie, can you hear me? Guess not.
Stacy, can you hear me?
Yes, Carol.
Thank you, Stacy.
Don't worry about
I think
it.
I might have it.
Can you hear us now?
No, still no. I can hear you now.
Okay, great.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I just want to reiterate, I know I sent you an email that kind of outlined the process that we're going to use today. But I want to just reiterate that for the school committee who are all here with us and the folks at home who might be watching on YouTube. So welcome. We are hoping that today's interview is going to be a little bit more of a dialogue back and forth than the first round of interviews, which was strictly direct questioning.
Sure.
And so we're going to have a limited number of questions, just 4 questions. And the first one will be asked by school committee woman and secretary of the school committee, Stacy Rizzo.
Okay.
She'll ask you a question and kind of talk back and forth with you. She'll have a few follow-ups, and we anticipate that will take about 10 minutes.
Okay.
And she'll invite the rest of the committee to ask any questions they might have related to the same conversation that Mrs. Rizzo was having with you. They won't
Okay.
ask you a question that's far afield from that topic. And after that, we'll go on to the second question, which will be asked by Dr. Mokaba. It'll follow the same format, a little bit of a back and forth between the two of you. And then she'll invite the committee to ask any questions they have, and we'll proceed with the third question by Vice Chair of the School Committee, Susan Gravellisi. And then the last question will be asked by Dr. Garcia.
Okay.
Okay. And
Great.
after that, we'll invite you to share any final thoughts that you might want to put before the committee before they proceed to the next phase.
Sure. Okay. Sounds great. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. And I just want to remind everybody to please mute their microphones if they're not speaking. And Mrs. Rizzo.
Good morning, Richie.
Good morning.
If you could possibly describe an innovative way in which you have successfully solved a special education problem.
Sure. So when I took over as principal of the Rumney Marsh Academy, there was kind of a unique scheduling dynamic within the small learning group population. Those are students with severe to moderate disabilities. And our general education students were receiving a 72-minute math block and a 72-minute English language arts block. And the small learning group population was receiving a 48-minute math block and then a 48-minute intervention or math intervention or ELA intervention, kind of alternated. And at times that was the same teacher. So they would have a core math teacher for 48 minutes. And then 3 days out of the 6-day cycle, they would go to that teacher in kind of an intervention block. And in working with the Walker program, we were able to sit with our teaching staff. And what we really found is that it was a bit of a disservice to our small learning group population in that their schedule did not match their non-disabled peers' schedule. And B, probably the most important aspect of that was that the teachers themselves wanted the long block. So that took some innovation in terms of how we were going to revamp the schedule to ensure that our small learning group population were receiving those long math and ELA blocks, but also not lose sight of the fact that we needed some remediation and some interventions embedded within that block. And kind of the key aspect of that was that the teachers really believed in that, and they felt as though, and they were confident that they could embed that intervention. And then for our kids, they have one math teacher that is now with them for a long block that they're ultimately going to experience at the high school level. And within that block, that teacher is not only delivering the core services, but also that intervention or remediation that they might need. It also set us up nicely for a dynamic where the SLG math teacher or ELA teacher, their morning responsibilities were teaching in an inclusion setting at the same grade level in which they teach later in the afternoon in an SLG setting. So they are seeing all of the innovative practices, the supportive practices. They're looking at the curriculum in an inclusion setting and maintaining high expectations and delivering, and a lot of times, the same version of that curriculum in the afternoon, of course, with different supports, different scaffolds. And that was a really big moment for me as a principal, because prior to that, I had extensive special ed knowledge as a teacher in the classroom. So I was an inclusion teacher at both SBA and GMS. So I had kind of that classroom lens. I ultimately became a literacy coach at the Garfield Middle School. And then kind of my special ed lens became more curriculum driven. You know, how are we going to create a writing format that's going to allow access for all of our learners? And so as a building principal, that was a bit of a defining moment, because it was the first time in which I was able to shape the system. And in order to do that, I think it was very important to communicate with teachers and make sure that this was the right move. And everybody felt that way. And I think it's been really successful for us.
Okay, so with change usually comes some backlash. Do you feel that you had to persuade to get others to agree with how you wanted to do it? And if so, how?
Yeah, so with other changes, I would say there was backlash. With this one, there was kind of a groundswell of, we need this change. I think kind of the unsettling, uneasy feeling that came with this change is the piece of, well, how much time do I dedicate to intervention and how much time do I dedicate to kind of the core curriculum? And there's not a definitive answer for that. As any good teacher knows, the students before you each year, their needs change, and the best teachers change to meet those needs each and every year. And you know, there may be a year where it might require a heavier dose of intervention, if you will. And so I think what my colleagues needed to hear was that I'm going to trust them and I'm going to communicate with them. And if they tell me, you know, this is a year where, you know, the kids are flying and the intervention is only taking up this much of time of the block, well, then that's fine for those kids because that's what they need. But that was the trickiest part of that particular change. But like I said, there was a groundswell in favor of this. So it was kind of, it wasn't the typical kind of uneasiness that comes with change.
So with that change, do you think you would be able to take it across the district? And I'm really not sure, maybe it's already done, the change of the block scheduling. If so, do you think it can be taken across the district to use, seeing that a lot of the small learning groups are different also?
Sure. So another great aspect that really came out of that change that I think influences fifth grade students that are coming into us and also influences eighth grade students that are exiting to the high school was that it was no longer defining our kids as a small learning group student across the board. So if the student had a specific learning disability that was math related, as a result of that schedule change, it allowed us to place them in inclusion rooms for social studies, science, and English language arts, because literacy was not part of their learning disability. But then they would attend a small learning group math because that's what the team decided they needed for math. So it was no longer that kind of SLG definition of you're in every single class. Now we have a bunch of students that are hybrid students that may receive an SLG class for one content area, but not be in an SLG class for another. And I think our ETL and our special ed liaisons have done a really nice job of communicating vertically to touch base with the ninth grade program and say, here's what the team is recommending. We're sending the student to you. Here's what their needs are. Here's where they excel. And without that structural change, we wouldn't have been able to do that because the schedule would not have lined up with those kind of shorter intervention blocks that we were kind of cramming in.
Thank you, Richie. At this point, any of my colleagues have a question pertaining to that? Anyone?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Carol.
Or an observation. Rich, you mentioned the word backlash, and
Yes, sir.
that has such the negative connotation, but sometimes it can be positive because it can help you design new programs and do new things.
Sure.
But it is a fact of life that we have that.
Yep.
So how would you say that you are, I don't really come with an assistant superintendent's job?
I'm sorry, Ms. Ty, you cut out a bit.
Oh.
Could you repeat the question? I apologize.
Oh, no problem. I'm sure it's me, Rich, not you. I said the word backlash.
Sure.
There's a word that you mentioned. And there will always be backlash. Just wave your finger if you can't hear me, okay?
I'm good. I can hear you.
Carol, can I interrupt? Because it wasn't,
Sure.
It wasn't Rich that used backlash, it was me.
Oh, all right. It doesn't matter, actually.
No.
If I misstated, it doesn't matter, but thank you. Because there will always be backlash everywhere from students or teachers, because people don't like change.
Sure.
So, you gave us a wonderful example. Can you think in general how you would deal with that when you are an assistant superintendent? Because there you would experience much more of it than you have had as a principal or certainly as a teacher.
Sure. Thank you. I was going to apologize for my vocabulary choice. Thank you, Stacy.
No problem.
I need a thesaurus for my 10th grade English
Perfectly
class.
legitimate.
No.
But it's a great question. And what I often think about is our coach's most recent training. And in working with my literacy coach and my math coach and touching base with them about what the training entailed, the big piece of it was to remove kind of the personal nature of disagreement. So they talk about a lot of times presenting, for example, in the coaching world, presenting teacher work. And really that it's a partnership of the literacy coach and a teacher looking at the work, much like if you went to the doctor's office, you'd be looking at an x-ray together. And it removes kind of that personal nature of things of this is my belief and this is the way it's always been done. And we're really looking at whether or not something has been effective, what kind of the evidence before us is telling us. Obviously, that depends on the circumstance that's before us. But I'm always drawn to kind of the topic or the piece of evidence that we're discussing, and not necessarily the back and forth of what we agree upon or don't agree upon. And as we talk about that evidence, of course, there's probably still going to be disagreements or resistance. And I feel like I have not left every single solitary meeting I've ever had with a 1000% agreement, but I always felt as though every meeting that I've left has ended with a mutual respect and understanding of where each person in the meeting is coming from. And that takes listening, that takes appreciating another's viewpoint, and then ultimately coming back to what's best for the students, if that's what's at the core of the conversation. And I try to, as much as I possibly can, always put that out as the objective of the meeting, and then give reminders throughout the course of the meeting that we have a common goal. And that's doing what's best for the student. And we're going to disagree along the way. We're going to agree about some other things. But if we keep coming back to that, it can help keep focused and not get bogged down in the personal nature of things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Well, then I will turn it over to Dr. Makoba for our second question.
Thank you. Hi, Richie.
I didn't know.
As the Assistant Superintendent of Pupil Personnel Services, you will be responsible for overseeing any harassment, bullying, and Title IX issues. Tell us in depth about an issue you responded to in one of these areas.
Okay. So I'm trying to think of a specific issue because I feel like I work with this a lot. So in a generalized sense, we often have situations that are can be defined or are presented as bullying within the middle school program. I think what we do in terms of a proactive approach to this is we try to build not only our students' competence with this area, but also all of our community members. We were named the Boston vs. Bully School of the Year. And as I said, that doesn't mean that we did not have any cases that were approaching or of the ilk of a bullying situation. It just means that we did extensive work with our students so that they had the vocabulary, the knowledge base to understand what bullying is, to understand how to engage in mediation, how to ensure that something that bothered one student doesn't keep occurring. So those situations have presented themselves at times in my 6 years as principal. If you're talking about one that rises to the level of this is not stopping or it's continuing to the point where it's considered harassment, certainly that's when we get everyone at the table. And by everyone, I would mean first meeting with one student's families, hearing the full story, then meeting with another student's family, hearing that full story. And then from there, it becomes defining what's going on and really recognizing that ultimately the practice has to end. The kind of subsequent steps after those meetings are typically to memorialize the meetings, to make our expectations crystal clear as to the direction we're going to move in moving forward. But I firmly believe in proactive work is often, I would say it reduces instances, and even when instances arrive, it makes them more manageable because everybody has the language, everybody has the understanding, And typically those meetings, we do arrive at a resolution.
Okay. So what would you define as your most important takeaway from this experience?
My most important takeaway is that I want everybody to feel comfortable and confident when they walk through our school doors. Staff, students, every single person that walks in the RMA community can feel comfortable and confident to achieve what they're here to achieve. And again, like, I feel like it's twofold. It's a proactive approach. It's an expectation around respect. And it's when situations arrive, it's dealing with them in a very timely manner, a very clear manner, and being sure. I think the most important piece in any of those situations is a plan moving forward. If you leave those meetings and there's no plan moving forward, chances are then that harassment or that behavior has a likelihood of happening again.
Now, what policy changes would you recommend as a result?
District-wide?
Mm-hmm. If any, yeah.
So I feel like our district does a really nice job of handling situations of harassment or bullying or anything like that. I feel, as a principal of a middle school where I'm working with over 600 adolescent students, I feel I have a clear understanding of how to approach these situations. I feel like, as a result, my assistant principals do a fantastic job of, again, being timely, being clear, and projecting a plan moving forward. We typically, as an administrative team, conference after a meeting like that has been held. We review exactly what came out of the meeting, what the plan is moving forward. I would say I've always been armed and felt confident to deal with those situations. If I thought about a policy change, so I think sometimes, this is not necessarily a concrete policy change, but I think sometimes administrators are jam-packed, and I think teasing out best practices and working with teams that are not our own team might be beneficial in defining what are our best practices when situations like this arise. That could be a group of elementary administrators meeting. At times, it could be vertical with elementary and middle school. And it would be in the nature of what our educators do on a daily basis in their PLGs, of meeting with one another and ensuring that all of the information and the policy that's being set forth by our district is being followed. And what does this typically look like in your school? That would be kind of a recommendation that I would have.
Mm-hmm. You sort of tackled my next question, which would be the steps you would take. You talked about educating staff,
Mm-hmm.
educating students, and educating families about those
Mm-hmm.
changes. How would you loop in that education piece to students and to families?
Yeah, so our kind of approach here was to really put this out there at the 6th grade level. We felt like that was the most optimal grade level for students to engage in this work. They had 2 years ahead of them. They were just coming to this new middle school. And we felt like the most important thing for us was to define what bullying and harassment are, to arm them with potential actions that they can take in order to prevent or stop it. And also identify trusted staff members in the building that they can turn to in private and have those effective conversations. I think we've always put out knowledge about the fact that bullying programs were happening in our school to families. I think if I had to think about an area that we could do better in, it would be to put out the content of what those meetings, what was in those meetings, so that not only the students are armed with that content, but also the family members as well. I feel like that could facilitate effective conversations in the home and really, really solidify the learning that the kids went through, because now not only did they go through it during the school day, they're now talking to their caregiver about that very same content. And I felt like we've taken steps in those directions, but certainly thinking about a way to reach families with very specific pieces of content about what the kids are learning about in terms of harassment, bullying, or effectively functioning as a member of our school community.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do any members of the school committee have any questions, follow up? No? With no follow-up questions, Susan, do you want to proceed with your question?
Thank you, Danielle. Hi, Richie.
Good morning.
As assistant superintendent, you will work closely with the superintendent and the school committee, which requires effective communication. What areas of communication are strengths for you?
I feel like my greatest strength in this area are relationships. And I don't think you can have effective communication without an authentic relationship. A strong relationship allows you to disagree effectively as needed sometimes, and still move towards a common goal. I also pride myself with action. So in terms of conversations that I've had with colleagues or staff around the district, I always feel like I am ready to roll up my sleeves and be a part of whatever it is that we're promoting or encouraging. And I feel like that's a big piece, because you gain the experience that can really facilitate effective follow-up conversations. So often things are decided, everybody leaves the table, and if my next piece of conversation with that group that left the table is the next time we sit at the table, then that's probably an issue, because I haven't engaged in the work that we decided as a group that we were going to engage in. And I feel like I took that approach as a co-teacher for a number of years across 2 middle schools, as the literacy coach working with a group of educators at the Garfield Middle School, and now as a principal. And I feel the very same approach would be needed if I were the assistant superintendent and working with everyone. I mean, in education, I find that everybody that is involved in education has a passion for it. And you have to have a way of cultivating that passion, but still have honest conversations with one another, and knowing that really that passion is the tie that binds us all. And that all of our thoughts, all of our opinions, all of our conversations are geared towards doing what's best for the students in this community.
Thank you. And also, how would you navigate a situation where members of the school committee have differing opinions than each other, which happens quite a bit?
Differing opinions, in what sense? That there's differing opinions across the school committee members?
Yes, correct. There may be one thing that, comes to the table and we all have different opinions, or
Sure.
We're split half and half, or how would you navigate a situation like that where the members are in disagreement with each other?
Sure. So I really try to pride myself on being solutions oriented. I use that phrase a lot. And what I think I would bring to that moment is my experience, my thoughts. I don't think I would try to side with anyone. I would just deliver what I have in terms of contributions or evidence to the situation or the circumstance. So an example, a recent example that comes to mind is this remote learning has been just such a heavy task for everyone involved. It's a heavy task because we care so much, and I can feel that with my staff. And we've lost that moment where we have the student right in front of us, and we know that the move that we made as a teacher or an administrator or a social worker, we know the impact because they're right in front of us. And that was a big loss for us. And I felt like we were in a tough spot for a bit, and because we care so much. So recently I asked the PLG facilitators to identify or ask their educators in their respective groups for a remote learning assignment that was a success to present to their peers. And I feel like over the past few weeks, that has been really impactful. I've heard from teachers, I've attended meetings, and the conversations have been extremely positive, informative, appreciative of people that were willing to present their work because they've had a success in this environment. Because we're all learning, in crunch time right now, and we want to be sure that we're delivering the best possible assignments. So kind of putting out that let's celebrate a success, because right now we're worried and concerned about so much. We have to highlight an area that's a success for us. And to get back to your question, I feel like that's what I would always try to bring to those meetings, especially if there was disagreement. Sometimes that kind of solutions oriented, again, returning back to the objective can be helpful.
Thank you. Do any of the other members have any questions? Carol, I think. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. You were cutting out for a little bit there, Rich. So
Yeah.
We do have differences.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes at a school committee level, that's a little bit more difficult for you to deal with than at a level of people who are on a par with you, or even underneath you. So, we are familiar with your personality and know much of what you have done and can do. But can you think of something specific where you would need to persuade us, and I don't mean on this particular job, but where you would need to persuade us to adopt a policy that some of us who are more conservative or some of us who are more liberal, how would you deal with us on that level?
Sure. So I always feel as though the diversity in our school district is something that is our greatest strength. And I feel like, when you consider all of the families and the students and the educators and the administrators and everyone that we service, you can't imagine the range of opinions or differences or thoughts and ideas. And I always feel like kind of the handbook that we have put out to our families and our school district is kind of the tie that binds us all. And so I would always kind of return to that. Is this something that needs to be a policy in our handbook that is going to be good for all of our students? And if we can come to an agreement on that, I feel like then that has to be a piece of the main source of what guides us as a district. Because I'm positive that not every RMA family believes in maybe some aspect of our school program, but we are all bound by doing what's best for kids. And if we feel like that is a piece that needs to be added or removed or whatever the conversation is, I feel like then that's where we would start.
Thank you. And if I could, because you cut out a little bit there when you were when Danielle was questioning you. So I'd like to go back to that for a moment.
Sure.
Have you ever had an issue of sexual or racial harassment or bullying with a staff member? And if so, how have you been able to deal with that? Maybe you're lucky
Yeah,
enough not.
Sure. So without going into detail, because I want to maintain confidentiality, yes, there was a situation, and how I dealt with that is I worked with our central office. I was able to interview any parties that were involved in the situation. We were able to gather details from everyone, and then we were able to resolve it. We did not define it as harassment, but it's something that we did not feel comfortable with and wanted to pursue that investigation. And it had the best possible outcome. I think ultimately the situation resulted in a better understanding of how comments can be interpreted, how something that you may have meant by a comment might be interpreted another way by the recipient. And I feel like
Right.
it was a valuable experience. We went through all the official protocols, and ultimately what I had said to Danielle about memorializing and following up with all parties to say, this is going to be the plan moving forward. This is what we've done. That's how we ultimately ended that particular situation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Did anybody else have a question for Rich? No.
Thank you.
But we'll move on to the fourth question is from Doc.
Mhm.
Sure. Good morning, Richie. Welcome to the second round of the interview process, and congratulations on making it.
Thank you.
As an assistant superintendent of pupil and personnel, you'll be guiding principals and curriculum and program directors
Mhm.
to ensure their jobs are well done and effective relationships exist between them, parents, and or community members. What are the three most important traits you will feel administrators should have to ensure these relationships are effective?
Sure. I would say the three most important traits. So I would say someone that is dedicated, hardworking, and honest. And I feel like that's what I've always brought to every position that I've ever held. I think I believe firmly in my heart for every position that I've ever held, what drives me and guides me are high expectations for everyone and an incredible willingness to provide support in order to help us reach those expectations. That was my approach in the classroom as an ELL teacher, as an ELA teacher, as a literacy coach, as a principal. My expectations are through the roof for everyone that walks through our doors, and my willingness to work hard and support everyone that walked through my doors to reach those expectations is really kind of the core of what I've done at every level that I've been at. And working with the range of folks that you had mentioned, I think I've had more of that in the 6 years as principal. Certainly as an educator, I often reached out to parents, but as a principal, you have staff, you have students, you have families, and I feel like I have I've had a great experience in servicing all three of those aspects of the process. And I feel like that experience has been invaluable. And sometimes it's challenging because the nature of a building administrator is so many spontaneous things happen. So while you're trying to have those moments and ensure that families, staff, or students feel as though they're being listened to, being respected, and their thoughts and ideas are being serving as an influence. It can be difficult, but I think what I pride myself on is carving out that time and being sure that I'm present. You know, if it's a half-hour meeting, if it's 2-hour meeting, that I'm present, I'm participating, and I'm listening. And that, again, we're going to come to some sort of common agreement.
Thank you for that answer. Follow-up question I have for you is, for each one of those 3 traits, describe one way you'd guide an administrator to improve his or her practice.
Sure. So I feel as though I have a great relationship with the administrators that work in our school district. I'm always able to have very open and honest conversations with them. I think my conversations with the administrators would be in a supporting role of their work. I think sometimes, a lot of times, when an administrator reaches out to an assistant superintendent or a superintendent, sometimes they're looking for a bit of objectivity, because sometimes they're so close to a situation that they may not be able to see things that someone with experience, expertise, and that's a bit removed from the situation a bit are able to note. So I think in terms of being honest, I would always be honest with administrators that I'm working with. I know how dedicated our administrators are to their practice. And so I don't feel like I would have to ever help in that area. And I also know how hardworking they are. But I think I would always go back to the trait of being an honest person. And I think that's what my colleagues respect about me. I think it's one trait that they would tell you that they respect about me, that I'm always honest, and that I would be able to advise with a range of experience that spans from teaching, coaching, special education, administration, the building day to day, communicating with families. I just feel like I've had such a wide range of experience since I started 14 years ago, that I would be able to help support their work.
So the last question I have for you is, as you know, part of this job will entail supervising, evaluating, monitoring to ensure that administrators and others are improving their practice. Could you please tell me a little bit about ways in which you'd monitor a school leader for improvement?
A school leader that was in need of improvement.
How would you monitor for improvement? How would you provide feedback? How would
Sure.
all those type of things that you.
Sure. I mean, the great aspect of our school district is that our administrators have the same educator growth process as our educators. So I feel like the starting point for any conversations in that area are through the educator growth system. It would start with goal setting. It would start with conversations around action steps to reach their goals. That would be the starting point of any solid relationship where I would be providing advice to an administrator. I would take the time to sit and again be present and work with them, and really try to identify areas together collaboratively. I mean, often I feel like administrators are often their own harshest critics, and thinking about, my hope is that they would come to the table and say, this is where an area I think it is in need of a look. How can we collaboratively work on this? And again, I think I would be reliant on my experience as a building principal to be able to collaborate with them and come to a solution. And I feel like I've always appreciated the educator growth system as an administrator because it helps focus my work. And it also challenges me to identify areas that are in need of improvement in my own building. And I think that's the great piece of our educator growth system, is that often we pick goals and action steps together collaboratively that really are areas that we want to improve upon. And so I think that would be the main avenue where I would work with an administrator that was in need of improvement.
Thank you. I'm done with my questions. Do any members of the school committee have a follow-up question?
One that's a little bit different. Anybody else who wants to speak?
Stacy has a question.
Okay.
Thank you. Richie, family and community is so important in our district and everywhere at this point. Are there any traits that you feel that central office, administration, and our directors should portray to ensure effectiveness in the community?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, having a welcome environment for the community, ensuring that they feel a part of the school community. That's done through effective communication. It's done through events where we welcome families into our school. Our best event year after year here is our culture night / student showcase. We have a potluck dinner. I feel like that aspect of the night is what draws so many families because they bring their own cultural dish. We have a buffet style set up, and everybody has a great meal and they're able to see student work. So I would say first, a welcoming environment. In order to kind of create that welcome environment, it's effective communication with families. I feel like a lot of times, to kind of echo what I said earlier, in an area that I would say that I've been working on is, instead of just posting that we had this assembly, what was in the assembly itself? What were the details that the kids learned? So a common book that everyone often references is Beyond the Bake Sale. And the concept behind that is really pushing and challenging ourselves to go beyond just a mere summary of what happened, that or just kind of a kind of bland topic. We really want to be able to deliver what educational specifics are our kids learning, so that those conversations can be solidified at home. And then I would say the third aspect would be kind of our approach to working with students and giving as much as we possibly can everybody what they need. So translation is a key resource that we use on a regular basis. I feel like my administrative team uses the HEART program often, very often, particularly when we have a student that might have attendance challenges. And we have so many great pieces that are able to support the buildings. And I'm always very appreciative of how those services work to support not only our work, but families as well.
Thank you, Richie. I'm
You're
done.
welcome.
So, Rich, it might seem anticlimactic at this point, but but because you've answered so many of this question in part in other places, but because the school committee members are part of the community, we often get calls, particularly on special needs kids, that, you know, the school department isn't doing right by them, or this particular teacher or this particular service provider simply isn't doing right. And, you know, and that we as a school committee member, well, we should be doing something about this and making this happen the right way. So if I called you or any of us called you and said, okay, grandma has said that her grandson is not getting the service and so forth. How would you deal with that?
So it's something I learned as a teacher and as a principal. We have to be reliant upon the team. And the special education team that services that student is not just educators or administrators. It's everyone at the table. That includes family members, the student themselves at times, the special educators, the general educators. It's convening the team to put that concern out on the table and get the team's thoughts about how we can best accomplish our goal. I don't think as an assistant superintendent, I would ever say, oh, well, I know what's best for that student, because I don't live at home with that student. I'm not servicing that student as an educator each and every day, providing the accommodations. And so I think the team is incredibly powerful. They do amazing work. And certainly within any team meeting, special education team meeting, there could always be disagreement. And I would always encourage the family member or the administrator, if the three of us are conversing, to convene the team and let's talk about this concern.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other committee members? Okay, Dr. Palucci, this brings us to the end of our question period. Before you leave us and before we say goodbye, is there anything else that you'd just like to share with the committee, or any information you'd like to have let them have so that we can proceed?
So I would just like to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity. The fact that I'm even interviewing, I'm just incredibly grateful and incredibly proud. As someone who came up through the Revere Public School System and was very reliant upon the Revere Public School System. So I'm not sure if my mom is watching, but she always tells me the story about that I was incredibly shy in my early childhood years, and my third grade teacher made me the person that had to take the milk orders and pass out the milk to each and every student, because it forced me to have conversations. And that teacher was Miss Yano. I remember her fondly. But I think that that story captures kind of the spirit of what I do each day, and really just trying to do whatever it takes to meet each and every student's needs. And students' needs range across, a host of levels. But I'm always dedicated to working hard and providing the very best I can. And I'm very honored to have this opportunity, and I thank each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Palucci, we will be in touch.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye.
You too, Rich.
All right, take care.
Okay, so at this point, I think the committee wants to go into executive session, and after we do that, if that passes, then we'll log off of this Zoom and go into a separate one.
Make a motion to go into executive session.
Second?
All in favor, all opposed? So moved.
Hey,
Aye.
Brian, I think we need a roll call for executive session.
Okay, roll call from the members.
Stacy Foster Mizzo here.
Danielle will lead the roll call. Go ahead, Danielle.
Mr. Ferranti,
Here.
Yes.
Mr. D'Ambrosio,
Yes.
Ms. Gravellisi,
Yes.
Mr. Sinella,
yes.
Ms. Ty,
Yes.
Mayor Arrigo.
Yes. The committee will now move into executive session without the intention of coming back to school committee member meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.